So today we are going to be having a lovely conversation with Candice Brackeen. And before we get started with that, just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors of the Entrepreneurs Change the World program. That would be P&G, KMK Law, Taft, Kroger, and First Financial. We are so excited to have Candice here, and I'm going to throw it over to you to start.
Well, I'm Candice Brackeen. I guess I'll just start a little bit with my story. So I actually run two orgs, so Lightship Foundation and Lightship Capital. So goodness, I'm originally from Toledo, Ohio. I moved to Cincinnati 25 years ago to attend UC, where I got a scholarship to study economics and statistics. Well, it was an econ scholarship, and then I minored in statistics. I loved my experience at UC, but realized shortly after graduating that, really sitting in an office was not for me. So I guess even that early, that entrepreneurial spirit lived in me. For many years after graduation, I was a consultant. And so I went into small to medium-sized businesses, helped them in various ways with consulting. But one thing I was really good at was restructuring. So helping those companies to restructure marketing and sales divisions, taking that kind of division, finding new leadership, training, figuring out what their true north was, and moving on. And so I did that for 13 years. And I also was a local brick and mortar business owner. So loved the experience of not only running my own, kind of day business, but also something nights and weekends and early mornings as a fitness studio owner. So that was my path for about 13 years. And then about 7 years ago, I got the startup bug. I have two sons. And when my oldest got to kindergarten, he was invited on a play date. It took us a long time to schedule. We went back and forth over email and voicemail and text message. And on the day I was supposed to pick him up, the mom wasn't there. There was a child care provider there, and she wasn't really watching my child at all. And my kid was playing Call of Duty with his friend, kind of cursing at the screen. And I realized in those moments that I just didn't share enough information. And so myself and a friend from that was at my kid's school, we decided to launch an app. We went through a local accelerator. So at the time it was UpTech in Northern Kentucky. We raised a few $100,000. And it was through that process that I realized that venture capital is not distributed equitably across the country. And I wanted to fix that for the region. So as I kind of started to run out of money and then also started to build my network here in Cincinnati, I started a group of folks called the Black Founders Network. That group was originally 11 people. So it's myself, Rodney Williams from Listener, Stephen Howie, who was at lots of different places, but Procter & Gamble, I think last, and maybe Kroger, and others. We were kind of in that initial group. That group grew and grew, and really was the inspiration for starting, at the time, what was called Hillman Accelerator back in 2017. So we just hit our 4-year anniversary of running this accelerator here locally. And just last year launched a fund specifically focused on supporting women and minorities in tech and innovation throughout the center of the country, so the mighty middle, as the Kauffman Foundation calls it, and then portions of the South. So that's me, that's what I'm up to. And there's lots more there, but I'll pause if you've got any questions for me.
Yeah, so I guess I have a question for you. What was it like? So you said that your first venture, one of your first projects as an entrepreneur was this app, correct? And what was that like from starting out to raising money? What was that process like for you? Was it difficult? How were you able as a mom to really kind of get this thing off the ground and get going?
So, for me, I don't look at it, I think they're parents, right? So I'm a parent, but I'm a woman first. And so everybody juggles something. So I didn't really even think about whether or not I could do it because I was a mom. I mean, I've always been an entrepreneur. So entrepreneurs just figure out a way to get things done. And so was it difficult? Asking people for money is difficult. Getting money from people is difficult. But it's just part of the job. If you want to get and accomplish something, you have to figure out how you're going to fund it. And so, the experience at UpTech was an incredible one. We were still, early days of startup Cincy, and building this ecosystem at the time. So I think, in 2015, maybe when I went through that program, there may have only been 6, 7 accelerators in the city. Fewer funds than there are now, fewer people participating in the ecosystem. So it was hard, but I think that even at the time, the ecosystem was trying its best to support the people who were engaging in the innovation economy. So yes, it was hard. It is still hard to raise money. It's hard for anyone. It is especially hard for women and minorities. But I think really even from its earliest beginnings, Startup Cincy has been more open-minded to making certain that everyone has an opportunity to participate. So while the numbers have always been low nationally, we've done, I think, above average numbers in the region.
Makes sense. It's always nice to hear a little startup Cincy pride, especially coming from Centrifuge and working so closely with Eric Weissman, who helps facilitate that wonderful organization. Another question I have for you is, what is it like, and I'm going to be question jumping all over this portion, but what is it like to be a female entrepreneur? I myself just graduated from Xavier. I'm currently in the job search, but hopefully eventually one day to start up my own, startup and figure out a problem to solve. But what is it like at the base to be a female entrepreneur?
Okay, so yeah, I think that, so Pete probably already knows what my answer is going to be to this. There are entrepreneurs and there is no gender to that. That is it. There are entrepreneurs. Yes. And that's it. And so it's all about having an entrepreneurial mindset. If I think about the companies in our foundation portfolio and in the fund portfolio, I can pattern match greatness based on a mentality and not based on gender, like the gender that they were born into. I will say, however, that there are some things that have been ingrained in women around the country. Sometimes women find it difficult to negotiate. So that is something that we talk very frequently about with the founders in our portfolio. It's not all women. It's some women have struggled with that, like those negotiation skills. One other thing that we sometimes see as a hang up is focusing on the feeling of what you're building and not so much the numbers. Mm-hmm. And so some folks coach women early on to tell this feel good kind of story, and that's not what investors want at all. They really just want the numbers. How am I going to get my money back, and how are you going to connect with the consumer so that you can sell things to get money back? But those are kind of two different things. But I would say just at the core, people are just entrepreneurs.
And what would you say make good qualities to be an entrepreneur? Granted, there's all different types of entrepreneurs and all different types of success stories, but what do you think are some qualities that people should embody or work on in order to be more of a successful entrepreneur?
Definitely understanding their why. So the purpose of what they're building. So I think that's a big thing. Being a subject matter expert or surrounding yourself with more subject matter experts in your field. Having the ability to pivot and move around as necessary. Those who understand their customers are going to win. Those who don't will never be able to succeed and scale. I can look across the portfolio and tell you those who do it best are transparent with the people around them. They are constantly looking at their metrics to understand where they are today in this very moment. They understand their financials, down to the penny, sometimes for a few years out. And those are educated guesses. And so folks who are able to take like really great educated guesses are amazing. Great entrepreneurs are thinking on the leading edge and out beyond the edge. They can see the future like many of us are unable to do. So they see something that we are unable to see, but they can explain it in a way that gets other people on board. There's a lot of great founder qualities, but those are just a few.
I know we could have a whole like day to discuss the.
Yeah, in my head, like I can see their faces. And so I'm almost telling you like, okay, and this is what this person's like, but I really can see those same qualities. And that kind of, it threads throughout the entire group of people that we've invested in.
So as a student then, or someone who's new into the entrepreneur scene, how do you kind of develop those qualities? Because I personally, when I was introduced to the entrepreneurial world, felt very overwhelmed. And, like you said, there's these different qualities that I think make up a good entrepreneur. But if you're a student, how do you really get yourself into that world and into that mindset? Because I think it sometimes can be a hard transition. You want it, but you need to get into it first, if that makes sense.
Yeah, a lot of it is, it's repetition. It's a lot of repetition. So, I started the accelerator in 2017. I've seen thousands of companies, videos, decks. And so there is not a day that goes by that I'm not reviewing a deck or a video or being introduced to a new company. And so I would say anyone who wants to be a practitioner in this space, just get in the reps. Go on, right now on our YouTube channel, there are 6 seasons of our show called Twitch Pitch, where you can see 12 companies every season go head to head. They're amazing pitches. And some of those companies have raised millions of dollars after the show. So just sit and watch and see, and mark off, what do you think is going to win? What do you think is not going to win? And so there are pitch competitions around the country that happen every day. There are demo days that happen around the country that are open virtually now that we live in this really truly virtual world. Go and get the reps that way. I would also say that, and Abby, we talked a little bit about this ahead of time, like we're both Ohio girls in Cincinnati. We love to obviously pub our startup Cincy and things that are happening in Ohio. I will say that Ohio Third Frontier, so if you're a state of Ohio student, you can participate in Ohio Third Frontier's diversity and inclusion internship program and look for an internship at one of the local organizations. Even if they don't have one open, ask them, hey, you may want to participate in this. You won't have to pay me so much money to give me the reps I need. And so I think that that's an opportunity. Get your way in, weave your way in. We have a University of Cincinnati student right now who's helping us look for folks to come into our boot camps and be on the pitch competition. And so she is, sifting through the world, sending out emails, cold calling, and getting the reps. And so I think it's just a practice that has to happen. And then over time, you'll start to notice through your own tracking, what's good and not. Maybe something you thought in the beginning was great isn't so great right now. Look, I'm 4 years into this. There are some folks I wouldn't have picked, but I'm gonna live and die by the fact that I tried my hardest in those moments with the facts that I had. I think I'm a better picker than I was when I started picking 4 years ago, but I'm still emerging and growing into, being a better and better VC.
I know Pete has his mic unmuted. Do you have anything to say about that, Pete?
Yeah, no, I actually wanted to transition to another question. First off, just absolutely delighted that you're participating. And I realize we had a few sign-up glitches, and we're recording this, and we're going to make sure we give this very aggressive distribution, because it's an honor to have you on the webcast. I wanted to get some perspective on where you see, I mean, you have such a unique perspective with your various programs. You've got this really interesting, extraordinarily unique kind of like funnel to lightship training programs. I've seen a lot of it in action. It's actually becoming national. And I suspect you're starting to develop some real assumptions and hypotheses about where the biggest opportunities might be. And it's at a time when, you know, obviously there hasn't been a bit of a wake up call, maybe not as much as it should be, but certainly encouraging in the last year where corporations for the first time are realizing that they need to play catch up, they need to leapfrog. But are you seeing like areas where there could be, where you're almost encouraging entrepreneurs to say, hey, listen, seize this opportunity because it's waiting for you? You've heard a lot of that from me on sustainability. And I partly like sustainability because I think the founder profile tends to be a lot more diverse, but I also think the end point is critical for the world today, and it can accelerate tech. But you know, for example, I've seen on your Twitch pitches, which I've really enjoyed, which I really encourage others, you know, there's definitely a future of media savviness that I see in your audience and your panelists that I don't see elsewhere. It leads me to think, okay, could that be a growth area? But where do you get most excited? And then how do you encourage your entrepreneurs to kind of seize the opportunity and the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, look, everybody knows Steve Case is a genius. So, you know, he's said over and over, like, it's all these in-between places is where, those are the places I get inspired. Places that people aren't paying attention to, because people say this over and over, intelligence is distributed equitably, you know, really opportunity isn't. And so there are smart people everywhere. So we are looking in the nooks and crannies. We are looking places that other people aren't looking. And that's where the opportunity is. And Pete, you are 100% right. The opportunity is sustainability. There's kind of like two areas that people need to pay attention, or three really necessarily. So sustainability, space, and healthcare, right? Like those are like the big things. When we launched this fund, obviously we weren't into space, but there's just going to be a lot of new opportunities there. And obviously we've seen a big highlight on that over the last couple of weeks. But sustainability is definitely a big one. You know, but for us, it's just most important that we're looking in the places and giving opportunity to those who really haven't had opportunities before, and helping them to navigate and kind of mold and grow something that people weren't paying attention to. It happens for us really all the time. We've recently made that we'll announce a new investment soon in a company that is selling a consumable product that is biodegradable and compostable. It's something that women wear once a month. And if I looked at, you know, my, you know, folks that we all work with every day, it's a new way and a new way of thinking. This particular product, when we invested, no one wanted to invest in the round. They made $5 million last year, which is incredible to me. And so we are giving opportunity to those who aren't, that are being overlooked. And so that's the opportunity. That's what I get most excited about. And it's fun to find those people kind of in the most random of places in the country. And that company won a pitch competition of ours in 2018. And we've tracked them ever since. And so the opportunity is to like really keep your ear out and pay attention and look where no one else is looking.
And a quick follow-up, are you optimistic, cautiously optimistic about, I mean, again, if we did an analysis of like PR statements, LinkedIn posts from, you know, the top corporations in America, I mean, there's been a decided shift, at least from positioning around diversity themes, new customer segments, and, you know, a far cry from when I was, you know, leading Hispanic marketing for P&G back in the day. But it's at least from a positioning, it's step change. Do you see that as an opportunity to really take what you're doing to a new level, maybe even to inspire founders to step out of, corporate America and say, okay, you can create the products that they now want to buy. Is it, are we approaching, kind of an inflection point, or is it just incremental progress?
Oh, gosh, we all want it to be an inflection point. I can say I'm optimistic that it's an inflection point. But it's cautious optimism. My call directly before this was with an LP of mine. There were 150 of us on a call. There's a wonderful couple in New York that started something called First Close Partners. They've invested in about 55 diverse general partners over the last year, and brought together about $20 million in capital to do that, and seeding different funds all over the country. It's those types of groups that are doing the most work, and I believe will make the most change over time. Our corporate partners have made really big statements over the last few years, or at least the last year, about changes that they'd like to make. And some have followed through very well. But some have also invested into that same one, like that one Black friend, like the safe person, and not distributing the capital so that there are more kind of, more cards dealt out. And so those are the things that kind of scare me that are happening. But there are some folks that are like just doing a fantastic job of it. I will shout out Lee Radford, like the amount of work with like Black founders she's done over the last year has been kind of incredible. And it hosted like different competitions. I know that, folks like Target are doing the same thing and helping folks to get onto shelf. And so some folks are doing a really fantastic job of it. And so, I will say, yes, there's definitely cautious optimism. And right now, this very well, the federal government, because we are in this kind of like state of the world right now, is putting dollars behind the innovation economy, and it'll, start to go to work early next year as SSBCI funds hit, state and local government. So that should help if the correct recommendations come through and the money makes it to where it needs to.
That's a great point. And for the students on the call or those that are listening to the webcast recording, Candice is referring to this unprecedented moment where there is just a massive push for entrepreneurship, innovation clusters, and in some of these areas that we've talked about, everything from like climate tech to green infrastructure to, pushing diversity in much more innovative, creative ways. And so I hope that you all take that as a kind of cause for optimism. There's a lot of wind behind the backs of entrepreneurs, wind and money behind the backs. Wind and money.
And like, Pete, this, like 98.7% of all assets in the country are managed by a white-led firm. So if we don't kind of make that shift and make great recommendations to the federal government for like the state small business credit initiative and things like that are kind of on the horizon, we won't shift that number. And then, you kind of roll yourself back, and you have to be a little bit more pessimistic about things. So no, we just have to like continue with the good fight every day and remind people of what needs to be done to make a long-term and lasting change.
And then the last question I'll ask, and then I'll kind of hand off back to Abby. I may have more later on, but any other just thoughts on what ecosystems can do to just increase odds of success? And what's interesting about Lightship and your work is that, you're distributed. You clearly are kind of hoping to build Cincinnati, but you've also got other communities that undoubtedly are leaning in pretty aggressively. I'm reading a lot about Tulsa, and Tulsa's interesting because I know you have roots there, but also it's kind of part of a national conversation about race. But like, what are the other, like, what else kind of creates the condition for creating a sense of entrepreneurial urgency to I like to use the word step change innovation, but really kind of move it in a big way. Is there anything that's kind of missing? Is it concentration? Is there a point where you have a concentration of, diverse entrepreneurs where suddenly things take off? Is it just about capital? Is there something in the centrifuge mix that we're not thinking about?
Well, okay, so look, some of these ecosystems that we're in, like, it doesn't hurt to have a local billionaire, right? Like that
Right.
one person who is like really there and focused on that one thing. So the work we're doing in Detroit, the work we're doing in Tulsa, like some of those things involve ultra high net worth individuals. But I will say that the ecosystems,
like the Dan Gilbert from Detroit, right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So that ecosystem is thriving because of the cash that's been infused there.
Okay.
And so there's a sense of urgency around that. I would say that the ecosystems that are doing best are creating more collisions than anyone else. So places to collide, events that are constantly happening, or just opening spaces to people to run into each other. So just having just regular meetups, open space to work on side hustles. That's what we're seeing a lot of. Attracting talent is big for kind of some of the more successful ecosystems. I mean, the sun doesn't hurt down there in Miami, but Tulsa is moving people. They have a program called Tulsa Remote. They'll pay $10,000 for you to move to their city. You could use $10,000 of that to put a down payment on a house. They've got coding schools they'll pay for you, which is like a big thing. So I would say that, some folks are taking really big swings at developing additional engineering talent. Miami has definitely done that at FIU. They have the most software engineers graduating in the country every semester. You would think that would be happening somewhere else, but most of them are people of color. And so there's just a lot of talent. And so how can we better facilitate talent? We need I believe, more coding schools here, whether that be a certificate or a diploma. So I think that just paying attention to that. But I think the attraction of companies is going to be big for us, and then also growing what we already have.
Excellent. Abby, others, because I've got a million questions. I love talking to Candice. At least I feel like it's better than an EV, recharging station.
I think Pete's got some very high volume, content filled questions that are definitely looking deeper into the ecosystem and asking deeper questions. But the next one I'm going to throw out is a little bit more basic, one could say. So the students next week actually have their pitch competition. There's, I believe, 11 teams that will be pitching all different sorts of ideas to a variety of judges, one of them being Pete. But what do you see in a good pitch deck? Because I know you mentioned earlier how you've seen thousands of pitch decks, you've seen thousands of pitches. What for you makes a good pitch and a standout deck?
Perfect. Okay, a standout deck is one that is not too many slides. So everyone knows this is 10 to 12 slides, but it is 10 slides, right? So 10 slides is it. Really talking about the strength of the team. I think that always goes super early, just kind of describing who you are and why you are an expert in this space, and really defining well your problem and solution is really the most important portion. If it's a pre-seed stage company, so like really early napkin idea or just getting into an alpha, going through the exercise of figuring out what the market opportunity and what your financials could potentially look like over time, that's important for any investors or mentors even, to be able to figure out your thought process and how you look at problems. And that's really more of what that thing is about. But I would say most importantly, it's talking about kind of the team, problem and solution, and making certain that you know that deck backwards and forwards. Like I I believe that a good deck and a good pitch involve kind of that founder knowing the presentation so well that's almost Shakespearean. You can kind of flip through the slides almost like flashcards, and at any point you can pitch what's on 5, you can pitch what's on 3 or 1 anytime. I think that's super important. But then also a good deck also gets adjusted over time. I think people think they're going to make one deck. You're going to make a lot of decks. You're going to redo this deck so many times, like over time. Maybe you end up with an appendix. Maybe you just make adjustments to your business model over time. But those decks get readjusted because you learn something after every pitch that really refines what your business will end up being long term.
Makes sense. And if your idea and your pitch is more, I would say basic, I don't like using that word too often, but if it's more basic, what do you think are the absolute must to include on your deck? Obviously, you want your customer value proposition and see how your business will grow over time, but what are other things that you would be sure to include on your deck?
I mean, just really having a good solid story of what you're doing, like your why. I think that's most important. And really, you're using the word basic, but like basic and simple really being the same thing. Like the deck should be simple. The focus should be on you telling the story. So there's different types of decks. There are presentation decks, there are mailable decks, there are sales decks. This one in particular we're talking about is for a pitch competition. So you really want the judges to be paying attention to you and squarely on you. You don't want any animations. You want to steer clear of video because believe me, it's going to go wrong. It might not be you, but it's going to be someone in that group of pitches it's going to go wrong for. So, I think that it's important to keep it simple and as simple as possible, but really just honing in on the story and practicing the story and anticipating any questions that could come up from a judging panel.
Interesting. I mean, I've personally done a couple of pitches in my time, and it's definitely a learning curve of how to improve your deck and how to improve your presentation over time, because it's not easy going up against whoever you may be pitching to, whether that's your professor at school or a teacher or even a coworker. It's not easy, and it's something that you definitely learn with over time. And I appreciate the fact that you're just like keep learning and know it frontwards and backwards, because I think that's one mistake that people can make quite easily. It looks like we have a question in the chat. What are some frequently asked questions for any pitch?
So how do you plan on making money? Because people always forget it. Or what about competition? Like, isn't Amazon your competition, or isn't Google your competition, or Zoom, or P&G, or you name it? Like, people are always concerned about competition. So that's having a good answer for that is going to be helpful. Other things, some investors ask, like, how am I going to get my money back? How do you plan on exiting this? So what is the end goal is something that lots of folks ask as well.
I know there was, I don't remember who exactly it was, but I had an entrepreneur come talk to me in class, and he was talking about how he was going up to pitch for Shark Tank. And he said that he and his team went through every single episode of Shark Tank. And not that the students have time to do this, but went through every single episode of Shark Tank and heard and wrote down what questions the sharks had asked and applied those questions to how they could be asked to their startup and to their idea. So I think even along those same lines of making sure you can answer some questions like who's your competition, also kind of diving into maybe those higher level questions eventually once you get there that the sharks are asking on TV and of that sort.
Yeah, and I mean, not overthinking things like what's your valuation and what discounts are you going to give and what's your cap, and like all of that stuff like doesn't matter at an early stage. And anybody who's trying to talk you through those things like isn't a savvy investor. Like those things like don't really matter all that much, over the long run, especially with a pre-seed stage company. But I will add, like, if you do go rewatch Shark Tank, like you can Google best of and worst of Shark Tank. We've done that exercise with a few of our portfolio companies. And, you know, the worst of is usually like someone who's not great at answering the questions, or that sometimes overvalue what they have built so far and undervalue what someone else can bring to the table. And so I think, you know, just Googling best of, worst of could really help.
That's a good point. And I think another question, you kind of mentioned it a little bit, is what do you do or what should you say if someone or, you know, a participant or an audience member, or even one of the judges asks a question that you don't necessarily know the answer to, or you didn't really think out? What advice would you give to someone? I'm assuming you don't say, well, we didn't really think about that, but I'm just curious as to how you should respond to those types of questions, especially if you're, you know, just developing, you don't necessarily know your product as you should, maybe. Do you have any advice relating to that?
You know, Abby, I think there's nothing wrong with being vulnerable. So I would rather an entrepreneur say, you know what, I've not thought of it from that angle before. Let me get back with you later about it. I'm going to do some thinking about it. You can also say, you know, my best guess would be this, but I need to really review that and get back with you about it. And I don't think that that's the wrong thing to do. I'd rather not have a founder like just make something up and be completely wrong, because you don't get grace with every mentor or investor or, you know, kind of people in the ecosystem. You know, grace isn't always given, and second chances, unfortunately, aren't always given. So just being vulnerable and just letting people know, you know what, you don't have all the answers. Coachability is a big thing. And showing that you can be coached and you are willing to learn, I think, is important.
And then I guess after you've gone through this pitch and you've gone through the pitch competition and you've received your feedback, and maybe that feedback is not so great, maybe you feel a little bit let down after your presentation, how do you keep going? Like, how do you rise from failure or rise from mistakes?
Well, that's how you learn. And I know it's hard because you're like, failing in public is really one of the hardest things. Like, there are several of us in startup Cincy that have failed companies. Like, I ran out of money. I had to let go of my whole team, like, in public, right? And so having a bad pitch is not the worst thing in the world. And the only person who's going to remember it is you. Like, there's really no one that's going to remember it. Maybe the judges, right? But it's really just you. So if you're competing against yourself, I personally like just learn and move and navigate and realize that bad things are going to continue to happen. Like this thing called entrepreneurship, it is a roller coaster. And sometimes those peaks and valleys happen on the same day. Sometimes they happen in the same 10 minutes. So that's just part of the life. And if it's not for you, there's nothing wrong with being an employee at a startup, with being an employee at a corporation, and being someone who innovates from within an organization. Not everyone has to be a founder, right? I've got a team of 14 people, and most of them have an ownership mindset. And I think that those people are equally as important to the growth of my organization as I am. And many times they are more important to the growth of an organization. So there's nothing wrong with failing. There's nothing wrong with being a founder that wins or loses. It's just being in the game.
There you go. And that kind of leads me to my final question. I don't know if the audience has any other questions. This is more of a very wide question, is do you have any other advice to someone who's starting up a company, who's got an idea, to someone who's, I mean, granted, you could say different things for these different individuals, but do you have some general advice or wisdom that you'd like to spread to the audience today?
So I'm just going to give out Rico Grant's advice So Rico, many people know, he's got Gallery at Gumbo over on Main Street. He does a lot of work with St. E's and acceleration work in Northern Kentucky. He's got Clues Noir.
One of my
Piece of advice, say it again.
One of my favorites.
He is. And so Rico's advice that I always share with people is that you can do anything from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., right? You can work a day job while you figure out what that thing is you want to do. So work on your side hustle, work on your big idea during that time that you might have been watching Netflix, during that time that you would have just been wasting time playing some sort of like game on your phone or scrolling through TikTok. So spend 10 to 2 building that thing. And then when it gets to be more hours than you can really deal and handle with, and you know your customers, that's when it's time to kind of have that thing enter the world. Other advice, like if you are going to build something, get to know your customer really early. Don't make a guess. You may think you're the customer because it was a problem of yours that you were trying to solve. Yeah, you're not it. So trying to go through and, test with people, asking lots of customers questions, that is primary. As I look through my own portfolio, we ask these questions all the time on a pretty regular basis. Like, has the persona of your customer changed at all? Have you learned about new personas that you should be marketing to? So, general advice is really making certain that you use your spare time wisely to grow something, but then to also know your customers as better than anyone else could.
Looks like we've got another question in the chat. In any pitch competition, do the businesses start from scratch, or do the businesses already exist and the team develops on its business?
I think it's both. It can absolutely be both. And there's nothing wrong with either. Pitch competitions, applications to accelerators and incubators, that's all just the practice of building a business model, right? I think that, years ago, and sometimes different brick and mortar companies do this, like they build a business plan. Well, kind of in the startup world, we build decks and we pitch and we practice that way. And it's the way that we get to learn our company. But it just depends on the pitch competition. Some are from scratch, like you would see on a startup weekend, that they are kind of building that way, and different and suddenly the words hackathons that happen on the weekends. So those are from scratch pitch competitions, and others are companies that are building and growing already.
Any other questions before we enjoy our Thursday afternoon, get a little bit of time back? If not, thank you so much, Candice, for sticking around and hanging out with us today. I know I personally really enjoyed this conversation. It's not every day that you get to sit down with a fellow female entrepreneur and talk a little bit about business and life. But thank you again to our sponsors. That's P&G, KMK Law, Taft, Kroger, and First Financial. We really appreciate their support. Obviously, this program would have not been able to happen without them. But thank you all so much for joining, and we will be sure to send out the video recording later, because I think there's some great nuggets in here of information. So thank you so much,
Thank you, Candice.
Thank you so much. Bye, Abby. Bye, Pete.
Bye. Have a great day.